This is The Princess Bride, the adventure book game. I'm a big fan of the film The Princess Bride, so when I saw this on the shelf, I decided I had to give it a shot. This was published in 2020 by Ravensburger, so let's dive right in and have a look, starting with the box art. I think this is a really attractive design. I really like the gold foil around these details on the edges of the box. This has this beautiful cream color with a little bit of a darkened patina around the edges to make the box look a little bit aged, but not necessarily overly worn. So pretty nice aesthetic there. They picture much of the cast on the front, but it looks like the art style is like they took a photograph and then ran it through a filter on Photoshop to line trace it, which it gives it sort of this uncanny valley quality. It's not too bad. I've seen worse. Kind of reminds me of like when they cell shade characters in video games, like if you've ever seen those Walking Dead Telltale games. One thing that I did notice too is they took some artistic liberty, in particular on Fred Savage's face and his grandfather's face, but not so much the rest of the cast. And Fred Savage looks like he came straight out of a Don Bluth movie, so that was kind of funny to me. I'm also not a big fan of the big, bold blue corner that Ravensburger used for their branding. I wish they would have either picked a color that fit a little bit more in with the dynamic, or maybe relocated that. I mean, I actually think that the smaller corners on the back and sides are a little more tasteful, but this huge dip here was really jarring when you have such a rich looking box. When we flip it over, we have a nice depiction of the game board and the game elements. I love the little blurb, "Inconceivable," up top. That's great. We can see the figurines that you use in the game, the storybook, and many of its gameplay elements. Now, this is a two-piece box with plenty of storage. Actually, really nice tolerances on the cardboard, nice thickness, feels really rich and weighty. Open this up, you have this nice divider inside for all the gameplay elements, and they provided plenty of Ziploc bags along with everything, so everything stores neatly and completely. So points to Ravensburger that they made a really nice game box here. Now, moving on to the gameplay elements themselves. So the game board is a pretty unique concept. This is a 6-chapter game. The chapters divide up the main portions of the movie, The Princess Bride. So players will work on a team of 1 to 4 to cooperatively work the primary characters of the story through the story. So it's kind of unique. There's no PvP or anything, so the game itself will actually offer some resistance. We'll get into the rules in a little bit. But essentially, each one of these chapters serves as kind of a level in the game, and you'll notice that they each have their own rule set or win-loss parameters, and along this side, you'll see they each have different challenges that the players must complete to finish out the chapter. So I think it's a really unique idea. I will say that it's kind of weird that it's a storybook board because it never quite sits completely level, but thankfully this isn't a huge problem because you're not really requiring a whole lot of precision out of this. You're just marking certain things or certain elements of the game. So most of the figurines, they have a nice wide base. They're not going to slide around too much. Most of the tokens are pretty chunky, so it's not really anything to worry about. Now, actually, talking about the figurines, I want to point out the sculpts on these are phenomenal. I'm not a big fan of the materials, but the actual art that went into these figurines, it's great detail. I mean, when you really take a nice look at them, these are wonderfully made. I even like that they feature their names imprinted on the bottoms of the bases there. It's very nice. It's just that one issue that I have is the plastic. It's kind of this rubberized plastic, so you know, I've seen a lot of games where they'll have harder plastic that tends to be a bit more brittle. And when we have finer things like Inigo Montoya's sword or Wesley's sword, or even Humperdinck has a scabbard hanging off his belt, I can understand where the game designers would not want that to break, but they kind of use this rubberized plastic. And my figurines are like permanently bent. So their swords are all curvy like a melted candle. And Humperdinck has this very Michael Jackson-esque lean to him. So the art is really nice, but the quality of materials on that, not my favorite. All the cards are really nice and snappy. However, I did have a problem with one set of cards here, or rather two. So there's 3 different decks that you're going to play the game with. There is the plot deck, the story deck, and the special deck. And the issue is the story and special deck have the exact same art on the back of the cards. Try as I might, I couldn't find a difference. Now, when I consulted the rule manual, the rule book actually mentions that this tiny little symbol is how you can tell them apart. Now, when you've actually played the game for a few minutes, you realize there are many more differences in the cards, and it's easy to tell them apart as soon as you flip them over. But it's very frustrating that they all have the same back. I don't really know why they made the decision to do that. This is a cooperative game. There's no need to actually hide the powers that you've gotten if you've gotten a special ability, and you're not playing poker with these. You're not mingling these decks either. So it doesn't really make much sense. And yes, the fact that you're not mingling them should mean that you don't mix them, but we all know that if you're packing these away in storage, it can get really easy for them to get shaken in together, and separating them will be a bear. So that was something that I found frustrating. All of the tokens that come with the game, though, nice, heavy tag board, very nicely printed. I actually, in particular, like these progress tokens. So as players go through the game and complete these little challenges along the side of the board, they'll mark them off with these little wax seals, and they have a silhouette of Wesley and Buttercup. Aw. So I like that. Also, each player gets a little handbill with a copy of the rules. It's kind of an abridged thing that tells you basically how the progress of each player's turn should be. So each player's turn is 5 phases. There's a move phase where they can move characters. There's the storytelling phase where they can play their cards. Then they can draw their cards. Then there's the plot phase where they draw from the plot deck, which this is the part of the game that drives the story forward, since they're playing basically cooperatively against the game. Drawing a plot card on each player's turn is how the game reacts to that player's actions. So they'll draw their plot card, and then at the very end, if their hand of story cards exceeds 6 cards, they'll discard the excess, and then it's the next player's turn. So it's nice to have that little reference for each player, because the first time you're playing, it's a little odd to get the feel for it. But essentially, the special cards come into play throughout the game, as there will be in the chapters various opportunities for players to earn these cards that give them different powers. So we'll get into that when we get into some of the finer points of gameplay. On to the rule book. So this is actually a very generous rule book. It's nice, glossy, full color print, sealed paper, a nice saddle stitch, very snappy. This will definitely stand the test of time. It thoroughly explains the flow of the game, how the game is meant to be played. It showcases all of the pieces very clearly. So, in fact, here's that infamous part where it tells me what the little symbol, the tiny little symbol on the cards that differentiates them is. Now, more importantly, actually, is the back section of the rule book. So you do need to keep the rule book on hand when you are playing the game. So as I mentioned, this game is 6 chapters. And so how it works is you have the basic core gameplay mechanic as outlined on these little rule cards, right? So players will get a chance to move, draw cards, which then they can play, and then the game will draw against them. Well, here's the kicker, is that core mechanic stays the same, but the goals, or the little challenges that players have to achieve to progress the game, will continue to get a little bit harder, and there will be more of them. And also the rule set changes. So the way to think of it is you have a basic core mechanic for the game, and then each different chapter is a different riff on that core mechanic, or basically increases the difficulty and adds or takes away a different feature. So I do think it's interesting as far as the concept, but in practice, one thing that I noted was because you have to stop between each chapter and refer to the rule book and set everything up according to the rule book. So different chapters will require different tokens and figurines set up in different configurations along the storybook path. And so right there, that interrupts gameplay. You have to reset the board. Then you have to go through what the chapter rules are, so basically what the variations on the game are with each player, and then go over the challenges. And so because you're shifting focus like that, and it happens where the chapters play about, the game quote's about 15 minutes. That can vary. So the actual gameplay per chapter is relatively short if the players are acquainted with the gameplay mechanics and continue to move it on smoothly. But in my experience, the first couple chapters were kind of a stumble start because everybody's learning. And then as soon as everybody's comfortable with that rule set and how to play the game and its basic mechanics, they move on to the next chapter, and we have to take a minute and explain the new variation of the rule or the rule set, and we have to explain what the win-loss parameters are, and that tends to break up the pace of the gameplay. And so that's the part that I think really worked against this storybook board game presentation. Is I actually think the concept is neat. I think the idea of having these different variations, so you have a single core gameplay mechanic and then you slightly vary the rules and vary what your player challenges are, that's neat. But the problem is trying to get a group of fresh players in, teach them the rule set, get them comfortable, and get them to play. I found that the game being interrupted between chapters led to us giving up early. I've play tested this 3 separate times with groups of friends, and usually we get to the end of chapter 2 and say, okay, that was neat. I mean, that was kind of fun, but I'm ready to try out a different game. It is kind of a tough one to bring new players in on, and playing solo, it just doesn't really do it for me. I'm sure there are some people who enjoy solo board games. For me, they're more of a social activity. So I did find that it is perfectly possible to play a one-player game and get through the story, and there is a challenge to it. However, that being said, it still feels like you're going through the motions, whether it's a single player or multiplayer game. The only difference is by adding the multiplayer aspect, that feeling of collaboration is really what drives it. But this is kind of one of those situations where as I was playing the game, and this was true for any time I group tested it, myself and everyone playing it, we eventually just went, I would rather watch the movie than play this game. And so that says a lot to me about the overall fun factor of this game. So I would say that clearly a lot of effort went into this game as far as fit and finish. It's a beautiful game. All of the elements are well made. The rule book is nice. All of the tokens are thick and rich. The design is nice. The figurines are highly detailed. It's a crying shame that I didn't really get, too wrapped up in the gameplay, or at least wrapped up enough to want to continue on. So I've played this, 3 times with multiplayer. I've tried single player twice, and I still just kind of get a ways into it and go, nah, I don't really feel like setting up the next chapter. And so that, I feel like that says a lot. So I guess I put it to you, The Princess Bride, the adventure book game. Have you played it? Do you know anybody who has? What are your thoughts? Comment below, let me know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.